They called her worthless. They laughed when she stumbled onto the platform in that torn red dress, skin too foreign, body too broken to matter. In a town where women were bought like cattle and men measured value in muscle and obedience, Mei Lin had neither. The sun burned overhead. The auction master's voice cracked with mockery. No one stepped forward. No one wanted damaged goods. But then a shadow moved at the edge of the crowd. A scarred rancher who never spoke. And what he did next would tear this valley apart. Stay until the end. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The platform wasn't meant for standing. It was old wood, weathered gray by seasons of sun and neglect, and it creaked under Mei Lin's weight like it resented her presence. She could feel every eye in the square on her, men mostly, tobacco-stained teeth and sun-cracked faces, arms crossed in judgment before she'd even opened her mouth. The red silk dress they'd put her in was supposed to make her desirable, she guessed. That's what the woman at the house had said anyway, tugging the fabric over Mei Lin's shoulders with rough hands and too much certainty. Men like a bit of color, the woman had muttered. Reminds them of something pretty before life got hard. But the dress had torn somewhere between the boarding house and here. A jagged rip ran from her hip to her knee, exposing pale skin that had seen too little sun and too much shadow. The silk, once vibrant, now looked cheap in the harsh midday light, like something trying too hard and failing, just like her. The auction master, a thick man with a voice that carried too much pleasure in its cruelty, stood beside her with a wooden cane in one hand and a ledger in the other. He didn't look at her when he spoke. "Lot 17, he announced, and there was laughter already rippling through the crowd. Female, Chinese, 22 years give or take. No skills to speak of. Came in on the last wagon train, half-starved and not much use for labor." Someone in the back yelled, "What's she good for then?" More laughter. The auction master grinned. "Hell if I know, but she's here and someone's got to take her. Starting bid, $10. Silence. Mei Lin kept her eyes on the dirt beyond the platform, focusing on a rock, a weed, anything that wasn't a face. Her hands trembled at her sides, and she hated that they did. Weakness was currency here, and she was already broke. $10, the auction master repeated, scanning the crowd. "Come on, boys. That's cheaper than a good horse." "Horse'd be more useful," someone muttered, and the men around him nodded. The sun was directly overhead now, pressing down on her like a hand. Sweat pooled at the base of her neck, and the torn dress stuck to her ribs. She wanted to pull it away from her skin, to breathe, but she didn't dare move. Movement drew attention, and attention here was dangerous. All right, the auction master said, his voice losing its performative cheer. $5. Anyone? 5? Nothing. Mei Lin felt something crack inside her chest. Not her heart exactly, but something close. The space where hope used to sit, maybe. She'd known this was possible. Hell, she'd expected it. But knowing and experiencing were different animals, and this one had teeth. $3, the auction master said, and now there was irritation in his tone. Jesus Christ, someone take her off my hands. I got real inventory to move. A man near the front spat into the dirt. Ain't paying $3 for something that'll die before winter. She ain't gonna die, the auction master snapped, though he didn't sound convinced. Look at her, the man said, louder now, playing to the crowd. She's half dead already. Probably can't even cook. What am I supposed to do with that? Teach her, the auction master said. I got a wife, don't need another mouth that can't pull weight. The laughter came again, and this time it had an edge. Mei Lin could feel the shift in the air, the way a crowd turns when they've decided something isn't worth their time. She'd seen it before, back in San Francisco. Back when the ships came in and the men sorted through the women like fruit at a market. The ones who didn't get picked ended up in worse places. She knew that. Everyone knew that. The auction master sighed, flipping a page in his ledger. Fine. $1. Final offer. Someone take her or she goes to the work camp. Mei Lin's breath caught. The work camp. She'd heard stories. Women sent, there didn't come back. Or if they did, they came back wrong. Hollow-eyed, broken in ways that didn't heal. $1, the auction master repeated. Come on, that's nothing. You spend more than that on whiskey. Silence stretched out, thick and suffocating. Mei Lin felt her knees start to buckle, but she locked them, forced herself to stay upright. If she fell now, it was over. They'd drag her off this platform and she'd disappear, and no one would remember her name. Not that anyone here knew it anyway. The auction master raised his cane, ready to strike the platform and move on. And then a voice cut through the quiet. "I'll take her." It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The crowd shifted, heads turning toward the back, and Mei Lin finally looked up. A man stood at the edge of the square, half in shadow, half in sun. Tall, but not imposing. Lean, like someone who'd skipped too many meals but kept moving anyway. He wore a hat pulled low, dark shirt rolled to the elbows, and his hands hung loose at his sides. No tension, no threat. Just standing there like he'd been waiting for this moment and finally decided to step into it. The auction master squinted. "That you, Ward?" The man nodded once. "You got $1?" Another nod. The auction master looked almost relieved. "All right then, she's yours." But the man didn't move yet. He was looking at Mei Lin now, and she met his gaze for the first time. His face was hard to read. Scarred along one cheek, eyes dark and tired, mouth set in a line that didn't give much away. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't frowning. He was just looking, like he was trying to figure out if she was real. "You understand what you're buying, Ward?" the auction master asked, and there was something almost mocking in his tone. "She don't speak much English, probably can't cook worth a damn, might not last the season." The man, Ward, finally looked away from Mei Lin and fixed his gaze on the auction master. When he spoke, his voice was flat, stripped of anything except fact. "I'll manage." The auction master shrugged. "Your funeral." Ward pulled a coin from his pocket and flipped it toward the platform. It landed in the dirt with a dull thud, and the auction master bent to retrieve it, grunting as his knees popped. "Pleasure doing business," he said, waving a hand toward Mei Lin like she was a sack of grain. "She's all yours." Ward stepped forward, and the crowd parted for him. Not out of respect exactly, more like they didn't know what to make of him. Caleb Ward was a ghost in this town, Mei Lin would learn later. A man who lived too far out, came in too rarely, and kept to himself in a way that made people uncomfortable. He didn't drink with the other ranchers, didn't gamble, didn't talk unless he had to, and now he'd just bought a woman no one else wanted. He stopped at the base of the platform and looked up at her. "You coming?" he asked. It wasn't an order, it was a question, and that surprised her more than anything. Mei Lin hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but run where? There was nowhere to go, no family, no money, no plan. This man was a stranger, but so was everyone else. At least he'd stepped forward when no one else had. She took a breath, steadied herself, and stepped down from the platform. Her legs nearly gave out when her feet hit the ground, but Ward caught her elbow, not rough, not possessive, just enough to keep her upright. His hand was calloused, warm, and he let go the second she found her balance. "You got a name?" he asked. She nodded, but her throat was too tight to speak. He waited a moment, then nodded back. "All right, we'll get to that later." He turned and started walking, and Mei Lin followed because there was nothing else to do. Behind them, the crowd was already moving on. The auction master called out the next lot, a plow, barely used, and the men shifted their attention like she'd never existed. Just another transaction. Another body moved from one place to another. But as Mei Lin walked beside this quiet stranger, something unfamiliar stirred in her chest. Not hope, exactly. Hope was too fragile, too easily crushed. This was smaller, sharper. It was the possibility that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't done yet. The walk through town was short, but brutal. Mei Lin could feel the stares, hear the whispers that weren't quite whispers. A woman leaning in a doorway said something to her companion, and they both laughed. A man loading a wagon stopped to watch them pass, shaking his head like he'd just witnessed something pitiful. Ward didn't acknowledge any of it. He walked with purpose, but not urgency, his stride steady, and Mei Lin struggled to keep up. Her feet ached in the thin shoes they'd given her, barely more than slippers, really, meant for indoors, not dirt roads baked hard by the sun. They passed the general store, the saloon, a church with peeling white paint. Everything looked tired here, like the town had been holding its breath for years and forgotten how to exhale. Dust hung in the air, disturbed by wagon wheels and boots, and the smell of manure mixed with something burnt, bread maybe, or wood. Ward stopped at the edge of town where a horse was tied to a post. It was a sturdy animal, brown with a white patch on its nose, and it nickered softly when Ward approached. He untied the reins, then glanced at Mei Lin. "You ever ride?" She shook her head. He considered this, then nodded toward the horse. "You'll ride. I'll walk." "No," she said, the word coming out sharper than she intended. Her English was broken, stitched together from fragments she'd picked up in San Francisco, but she knew enough. "I walk." Ward studied her for a moment, and she thought he might argue, but he didn't. He just shrugged. "Suit yourself." He started walking again, leading the horse, and Mei Lin fell into step beside him. The road stretched out ahead, cutting through dry grassland that shimmered in the heat. Mountains rose in the distance, blue-gray and hazy, and the sky above was so wide it made her dizzy. They walked in silence for what felt like hours. Mei Lin's feet screamed at her, blisters forming where the shoes rubbed wrong, but she didn't stop. She'd learned a long time ago that stopping meant giving up, and giving up meant dying. So she kept moving. Ward didn't speak, but he slowed his pace without making it obvious. And when they passed a creek, just a thin trickle of water cutting through the rocks, he stopped and gestured toward it. "Drink if you need to." Mei Lin knelt by the water, cupping her hands and bringing the cool liquid to her lips. It tasted clean, almost sweet, and she drank until her stomach protested. When she looked up, Ward was crouched a few feet away, letting the horse drink. "How far?" she asked. He glanced at the sun, calculating. "Few more hours." She nodded, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. "You got a name?" he asked again, softer this time. "Mei Lin." He repeated it, testing the sounds. "Mei Lin." "Close enough." "And you?" she asked. "Caleb Ward. Most folks just call me Ward." She nodded. "Ward." They stayed by the creek for a few more minutes, and Mei Lin noticed the way he moved. Careful, deliberate, like someone who'd learned to conserve energy because there was never enough of it. His hands were scarred, she saw now. Old burns, maybe, or cuts that had healed badly. And the scar on his face, the one that ran from his temple to his jaw, looked like it had hurt. "What happened?" she asked before she could stop herself, gesturing toward the scar. Ward touched it absently, like he'd forgotten it was there. "Horse kicked me. Long time ago." "Hurt?" "Yeah." He didn't elaborate, and she didn't push. When they started walking again, the silence felt different, less heavy, more like two people who didn't need to fill the air with words just to prove they existed. The sun was low when they finally reached the valley. Mei Lin saw it first as a dip in the land, a place where the hills folded in on themselves and created a pocket of green amidst all the brown. A creek ran through it, wider than the one they'd stopped at earlier, and trees clustered along its banks, their leaves rustling in the breeze. And there, at the center of it all, was a cabin. It wasn't much. Single story, wood that had weathered to a soft gray, a stone chimney on one side. The roof looked solid, at least, and there was a small porch with a chair that had seen better days. A garden plot sat near the side, though it looked mostly abandoned, weeds choking out whatever had been planted there. Ward stopped at the edge of the property, and Mei Lin stopped beside him. "This is it," he said. She looked at the cabin, then at him. "You live here?" "Yeah." "Alone?" "Was." The word hung between them, and Mei Lin felt the weight of it. Was. Past tense. Not anymore. Ward led the horse to a small barn behind the cabin, and Mei Lin followed. Inside it smelled like hay and leather, and there were tools hanging on the walls. Shovels, axes, things she didn't have names for. He unsaddled the horse, moving with the ease of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, and then filled a bucket with water from a trough. When he was done, he turned to Mei Lin. "Come on, I'll show you inside." The cabin was dim and cool after the heat outside. There was a main room with a table, 2 chairs, and a wood stove in the corner. Shelves lined one wall, holding jars of preserves, sacks of flour, a few dented pots. Everything was clean but sparse, like someone who only kept what they needed and nothing more. Ward gestured toward a door on the far side of the room. That's your room. Maylin blinked. My room? Yeah. She crossed to the door and pushed it open. Inside was a small bed, a trunk, and a window that looked out over the valley. The bed had a quilt on it, faded but whole, and the floor was swept clean. There's a lock, Ward said from behind her, on the inside. She turned to look at him, not understanding. He pointed to the door. Lock. So you can, keep it shut, if you want. It took her a moment to process what he was saying. A lock. On the inside. So she could keep him out. Why? She asked. Ward shifted, uncomfortable. Just seemed right. Maylin looked at the door, at the lock, and something in her chest loosened. She didn't know this man, didn't trust him, but he'd just given her the one thing she hadn't had in months, control, even if it was just over a door. Thank you, she said quietly. Ward nodded, already turning away. I'll leave you to settle in. There's water in the basin if you want to wash up. Supper's in an hour or so. He left, closing the door behind him, and Maylin stood in the center of the small room, trying to remember the last time she'd been alone. Really alone. Not crammed in a boarding house with 10 other women, not locked in a ship's hold, not standing on a platform while men decided her worth. Just alone. She sat on the bed, and the quilt was soft under her hands. Outside, she could hear the creak, the wind in the trees, the distant call of a bird she didn't recognize. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Maylin let herself cry. Supper was bread and stew. Ward had made it earlier, he said, and it had been simmering all day. It wasn't fancy. Potatoes, carrots, some kind of meat she didn't ask about, but it was hot and filling, and Maylin ate until her stomach stopped aching. They sat across from each other at the table, and Ward didn't try to make conversation. He ate methodically, soaking bread in the broth, chewing slowly. When he was done, he pushed his bowl away and leaned back in his chair. You know how to cook? He asked. Maylin nodded. Some. Good, I'm not great at it. She almost smiled. Almost. What else you know how to do? She thought about it. Sew, clean, wash clothes. Ward nodded. That'll help. What do you need? She asked. He looked around the cabin, and for the first time she saw something like embarrassment cross his face. Honestly, everything. I'm not good at keeping a house. I can work the land, fix things, hunt, but the rest of it? He trailed off, shaking his head. It's a mess. Maylin looked around too. The cabin wasn't dirty, but it was neglected. Dust on the shelves, cobwebs in the corners, the garden outside choked with weeds. This was a place where someone survived, but didn't live. I can help, she said. Ward met her eyes. I'd appreciate that. They sat in silence for a while, and then Ward stood collecting the bowls. I'll clean up, he said. You should rest. Maylin wanted to argue, but her body betrayed her. She was exhausted, bone-deep tired in a way that sleep might not even fix. So she nodded, stood, and made her way to her room. Before she closed the door, she turned back. Ward? He looked up from the basin where he was washing the dishes. Why did you buy me? He was quiet for a long moment, and she thought he might not answer, but then he set down the bowl he was holding and met her gaze. Because no one else did. It wasn't the answer she expected. It wasn't romantic or heroic. It was just honest. She nodded, then closed the door. And for the first time since stepping onto that platform, she locked it. The days that followed settled into a rhythm. Maylin woke early, before the sun, and started with the garden. It was a disaster. Weeds tangled around the remnants of what might have been beans or squash, the soil dry and cracked. But she'd worked worse. She pulled weeds until her hands were raw, then soaked the ground with water from the creek, bucket by bucket. Ward didn't hover. He went about his work, mending fences, checking traps, chopping wood, and left her to hers. But she noticed the small things. How he always made sure there was water in the basin before she woke. How he set out tools she might need without saying a word. How he never came near her room unless she called for him. At night, they ate together. Maylin had taken over cooking, and Ward didn't complain, even when she experimented with spices she'd brought from the boarding house. things the other women had pressed into her hands before she left. Ginger, star anise, a small packet of tea. "What is this?" Ward asked one night, poking at a bowl of soup she'd made. "Ginger chicken," she said. "You don't like?" He took a tentative bite, then another. "No, it's good. Just different." She smiled. It was a small smile, barely there, but it was the first one she'd managed since arriving. 2 weeks in, a neighbor showed up. Maylin was outside, hanging laundry on a line Ward had strung between two trees when she heard the sound of hooves. She turned to see a man riding toward the cabin, older than Ward, with a thick beard and a rifle across his saddle. Ward came out of the barn, wiping his hands on his pants. "Jameson," he said, and his voice was careful. The man dismounted, nodding toward Maylin. "Heard you got yourself some company." "News travels," Ward said. Jameson's eyes stayed on Maylin, and she didn't like the way he looked at her, like she was a curiosity, something strange and out of place. She went back to hanging the laundry, but she listened. "People are talking," Jameson said. "People always talk." "Yeah, but this time it's different. You know how folks are. They see something they don't understand. They get nervous." Ward crossed his arms. "She's not hurting anyone. I know that. You know that. But there's others who don't care about facts. They just care about what they think." Jameson paused, then lowered his voice. "Victor Hale's been stirring things up, saying it's not right, a white man taking in a Chinese woman, saying it's against nature." Maylin's hand stilled on the clothesline. Ward's jaw tightened. "Victor Hale can go to hell." Jameson sighed. "I'm just warning you, Ward, he's got influence. And he's got men who listen to him. You keep your head down, maybe it blows over. But if you don't..." He shook his head. "Just be careful." "Appreciate the warning," Ward said, but his tone made it clear the conversation was over. Jameson mounted his horse, tipped his hat toward Maylin, and rode off. When he was gone, Ward stood there for a moment, staring at the horizon. Then he turned and met Maylin's eyes. "You don't need to worry about Victor Hale," he said, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands had curled into fists, and she knew that worry or not, trouble was coming. That night, Maylin couldn't sleep. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the cabin settling. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows, and she pulled the quilt tighter around herself. She thought about Victor Hale, about the men in town who'd laughed at her on the platform, about the way Jameson had looked at her, like she was a problem waiting to happen. She thought about Ward, too, about the way he'd stepped forward when no one else had, about the lock on her door, about the way he never asked for anything except her presence at the table. And she realized, with a clarity that cut through the fear, that she didn't want to leave. This cabin, this valley, it wasn't perfect. It was hard and isolated and full of unknowns. But it was hers. Or at least it could be. She just had to fight for it. The storm Jameson warned about didn't come immediately. Days passed, then weeks. The garden grew. The cabin became cleaner, warmer, more alive. Maylin learned the rhythms of Ward's life, and he learned hers. They didn't talk much, but they didn't need to. And then, one evening, everything changed. Ward came back from town with supplies, his face darker than usual. He unloaded the wagon in silence, and Maylin knew better than to push. But at supper, he finally spoke. "Victor Hale's claiming I owe him money." Maylin looked up. "Do you?" "No. I paid my debts years ago, but he's saying otherwise. Says I borrowed against the land, never paid it back." "Can he prove it?" Ward shook his head. "He doesn't need to. He's got the sheriff in his pocket. He says I owe, the sheriff backs him up, and that's that." "What does he want?" Ward met her eyes. "Everything." The word hung in the air, heavy and final. "And if you don't give it, then he takes it. The land, the cabin." He paused. "You." Maylin felt ice spread through her veins. "Me?" Ward's hands clenched on the table. He said a debt like mine could be settled in other ways, and he made it real clear what he meant. Maylin stood, the chair scraping against the floor. "I won't go. I know. I won't." Ward stood too, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw fury in his eyes, not directed at her, at the world. At men like Victor Hale, who thought they could take whatever they wanted. Neither will I, he said. And in that moment, Mei Lin knew that whatever was coming, they'd face it together, even if it meant burning the whole valley down. The night stretched long after Ward's declaration, and neither of them slept much. Mei Lin lay in her bed, listening to the creak of floorboards as Ward paced the main room, his boots a steady rhythm against the wood. She thought about getting up, offering tea, saying something, anything, but the words wouldn't form. What could she say that would change what was coming? By dawn, exhaustion had settled into her bones, but she rose anyway. The cabin felt different in the gray light, smaller somehow, like the walls were closing in. She found Ward at the table, a cup of cold coffee in front of him, staring at nothing. "You didn't sleep," she said. He glanced up, and the shadows under his eyes confirmed it. "Neither did you." She moved to the stove, stoking the coals back to life. "What do we do?" Ward rubbed his face with both hands. "I don't know yet, but Hale's not getting this place, and he's sure as hell not getting you." The certainty in his voice should have been comforting, but Mei Lin had seen what happened to people who stood against power. She'd watched it in San Francisco, watched men with influence crush anyone who challenged them. Victor Hale sounded like the same kind of man, just wearing different clothes. "Maybe we leave," she said quietly, measuring out coffee grounds. "Go somewhere he can't find us." Ward shook his head. "I've got everything I own tied up in this land. Leave now, I've got nothing. And running doesn't solve the problem. It just delays it. Staying might get you killed." "Maybe, but at least I'll die on my own ground." The words hung heavy between them, and Mei Lin felt something cold settle in her stomach. She'd survived too much to watch someone die for her. Not again. Not when there might be another way. She set the coffee to boil and turned to face him. "Then we need a plan." Ward looked at her for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or respect. "You got ideas?" "Not yet, but two people think better than one." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Fair enough." They spent the morning talking through options, most of them bad. Ward could go to the sheriff, but Jameson had made it clear the man was in Hale's pocket. They could gather witnesses to prove Ward had paid his debts, but who would testify against someone like Hale? The town ran on fear as much as money, and people had families to protect. "What about the bank?" Mei Lin asked. "They would have records." Ward shook his head. "Burned down 3 years ago. All the records with it. That's probably why Hale's making his move now. No paper trail to prove him wrong." "Convenient." "Yeah, real convenient." Mei Lin poured them both fresh coffee, thinking, "What does he want most? The land or you gone?" Ward considered this. The land. This valley's got water year-round, good soil. He's been trying to buy it for years, but I wouldn't sell. Figure he's tired of asking. So he invents a debt. That's about the size of it. She sat across from him, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. Men like him, they don't like being told no. Makes them mean. You know the type. I've met a few. She didn't elaborate, and Ward didn't push. Outside, the sun was climbing higher, burning off the morning chill. They could hear birds in the trees, the creek running its course, the everyday sounds of a world that didn't care about their problems. It would keep turning whether they solved this or not. Ward stood, draining his cup. "I need to fix the fence in the south pasture. Wire's been loose for a week." Mei Lin nodded, recognizing the need to keep moving, to do something productive while the mind worked through impossible problems. "I'll work on the garden." They moved through the day in parallel, each lost in their own thoughts. Mei Lin pulled weeds with more force than necessary, her hands working while her brain turned over possibilities. There had to be an angle they were missing, some weakness in Hale's plan. Men like him always had weaknesses. You just had to find them. By afternoon, her back ached and her hands were filthy, but the garden looked better. She was hauling water from the creek when she heard horses approaching. Not one this time. Several. Ward emerged from the barn, rifle already in his hands. His face was set, jaw tight. "Get inside." "No." He turned to her, and there was no room for argument in his eyes. "Mei Lin, inside, now." But she'd spent too many months being told where to go, what to do, how to disappear. She set down the bucket and stood her ground. I stay. Ward looked like he wanted to argue, but the horses were closer now, and there wasn't time. He positioned himself between her and the approaching riders, the rifle held low but ready. 3 men crested the ridge. The one in front was older, well-dressed for the frontier. Tailored jacket, clean hat, boots that had never seen real work. Victor Hale. It had to be. The 2 men flanking him were younger, harder, with the look of men who got paid to solve problems with their fists or worse. Hale reined his horse to a stop about 20 feet from the cabin, his eyes sweeping the property before settling on Ward. Caleb Ward. Been a while. Not long enough, Ward said. Hale smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Now, that's no way to greet an old friend. We're not friends. Business associates, then. Which brings me to why I'm here. He shifted in his saddle, making a show of getting comfortable. You remember that loan I gave you back in '73? $200 to help you through that rough winter? Never happened. See, that's where your memory and mine differ. I've got documentation that says otherwise. You've got lies. Hale's smile widened. Strong words for a man in your position. Tell you what, I'm a reasonable man. I know times are hard, so I'm willing to settle this debt for the land. Sign it over. We'll call it square. And you can walk away with your life and whatever you can carry. And if I don't? Hale's expression hardened. Then the sheriff comes out here with a court order, and you get nothing. Not the land, not your dignity, nothing. Ward's grip on the rifle tightened. That's supposed to scare me? It should. Hale's eyes flicked to Mei Lin, and something cold slithered across his face. Though I suppose you've got other assets that might settle the debt. That Chinese girl, for instance. She'd fetch a decent price in the right market. Mei Lin felt her blood turn to ice, but she kept her face blank. She'd learned long ago not to give men like this the satisfaction of seeing fear. Ward took a step forward, and the 2 men with Hale immediately reached for their guns. But Ward didn't raise the rifle, didn't make a move. He just spoke, and his voice was colder than Mei Lin had ever heard it. You come near her, I'll kill you. Don't care what it costs me, I'll put you in the ground. Hale studied him for a moment, then laughed. You'd die for a woman you bought for $1? That's pathetic, Ward, even for you. Test me and find out. The air between them crackled with violence, and Mei Lin could feel how close they were to blood. One wrong word, one sudden movement, and this valley would become a graveyard. But Hale was smart enough to know when to retreat. He gathered his reins, his smile returning. You've got 3 days to think it over. After that, I stop being nice. Consider that a courtesy. He wheeled his horse around, his men following, and they rode back the way they came. Ward didn't move until they disappeared over the ridge, and even then he stood there, rifle in hand, watching. Finally, he lowered the weapon and turned to Mei Lin. You all right? She nodded, though her hands were shaking. You shouldn't have threatened him. He threatened you first. He has power. You don't. Ward met her eyes. I've got this rifle and the will to use it. That's power enough. But Mei Lin knew better. She'd seen what happened when people without power tried to fight people who had it. It never ended well. That night, Ward cleaned his rifle at the table while Mei Lin prepared supper. Neither spoke much, but the silence was different now, heavier, loaded with things they couldn't say. When the stew was ready, they ate without tasting it. 3 days isn't much time, Mei Lin said eventually. No. What will you do? Ward set down his spoon. I'll fight. It's all I know how to do. Fighting gets you killed. So does running. So does giving up. He looked at her. You think I should just hand him the land? I think you should live. Living and existing aren't the same thing. I hand over this place. What do I have left? Where do I go? What do I do? He shook his head. This valley is the only thing I've ever built that mattered. I won't give it up without a fight. Mei Lin understood that better than he knew. She'd lost everything once already. Home, family, the life she'd thought she'd have. Starting over from nothing was harder than people imagined. Maybe impossible. Then we fight smart, she said. Not hard. Ward raised an eyebrow. What's the difference? Hard means you shoot him and his men shoot you back. Smart means we find a way to break his story before he breaks us. How? She didn't have an answer yet, but she was working on it. Let me think. The next day brought unexpected help. Jameson returned, this time with his wife, Clara. She was a sturdy woman with graying hair and kind eyes, and she carried a basket covered with a cloth. Brought you some bread, Clara said, handing it to Mei Lin. Figured you could use it. Mei Lin took the basket, surprised by the gesture. Thank you. Clara smiled. Jameson told me what's happening with Hale, wanted you to know there's folks who don't agree with what he's doing. Ward stepped out onto the porch. Appreciate that, Clara. But agreeing and helping are different things. True enough, Jameson said, but we're not the only ones who think Hale's gone too far. He's been pushing people around for years. Most folks are too scared to stand up to him, but that doesn't mean they like it. Scared doesn't pay my bills. No, but it might give you leverage. Jameson glanced at his wife, who nodded. There's a town meeting in 2 days. Hale's planning to bring his claim against you in front of everyone, make it official. He thinks the community will side with him because of, well, he looked at Mei Lin. No offense, ma'am. None taken. She'd heard worse. Clara stepped forward. But if enough people speak up, remind everyone that Hale's been pulling this kind of thing for years, maybe public opinion turns. Makes it harder for the sheriff to back him without looking like a crook himself. Ward crossed his arms. That's a lot of maybes. It's more than you had yesterday, Jameson pointed out. He had a point. Ward looked at Mei Lin and she could see him calculating odds, weighing risks. Finally, he nodded. All right, we'll go to the meeting, but I'm bringing the rifle. Fair, Jameson said. Just don't shoot anyone unless you have to. Can't promise that. Clara laughed despite the tension. You always were stubborn, Caleb Ward. Glad to see some things don't change. After they left, Mei Lin found Ward standing by the creek, staring at the water. She approached quietly, not wanting to disturb whatever thoughts he was working through. You think it'll work? He asked without turning. The meeting? I don't know, but it's better than sitting here waiting for him to come take everything. Ward picked up a stone and tossed it into the creek. I'm not good with people. Never have been. I say the wrong thing, make folks uncomfortable. That's why I live out here in the first place. Then let me speak. He turned to her surprised. You? I've got nothing to lose. They already think I'm strange, foreign, not one of them. Maybe that works in our favor. How? Mei Lin considered her words carefully. Men like Hale, they rely on people staying quiet, accepting their lot. If I stand up and refuse to be quiet, it might shake something loose, make people remember they have voices too. Ward studied her face. You're braver than you look. I'm not brave. I'm just tired of being afraid. That night, Mei Lin couldn't sleep again. She lay in bed running through what she might say at the meeting, how she might frame the truth in a way that made people listen. But every scenario ended the same way, with her words dismissed, her presence used as evidence against Ward rather than for him. She was still awake when she heard the sound, soft at first, barely audible over the wind. Footsteps. Outside. Mei Lin's heart kicked against her ribs. She slipped out of bed, moving to the window. The moon was half full, casting pale light across the valley, and in that light she saw shapes moving near the barn. 3 of them. Maybe 4. She grabbed her shawl and moved quickly to Ward's door, knocking softly. Ward? He was awake instantly, opening the door with the rifle already in hand. What is it? Someone's outside, by the barn. His face went hard. Stay here. No. Mei Lin, I'm not hiding while you go out there alone. He looked like he wanted to argue, but there wasn't time. Instead, he pressed a heavy iron poker from the stove into her hands. Stay behind me. And if something happens, you run. Don't look back. Just run. They moved through the cabin silently, and Ward eased the door open. The valley was quiet except for the wind and the creek, but Mei Lin could feel the wrongness in the air. Someone was out there. Ward stepped onto the porch, rifle raised. I know you're there. Show yourselves or I start shooting. For a moment, nothing. Then a voice called out from the darkness near the barn. Easy, Ward. We're not here for trouble." "Then what are you here for?" Three men stepped into the moonlight, hands visible, no weapons drawn. Maylin recognized one of them from town, a younger man who worked at the general store. The other two she didn't know. "We heard about Hale," the store clerk said, "about what he's trying to do. Wanted to let you know you're not alone in this." Ward didn't lower the rifle. "Kind of late for a social call." "Couldn't come during the day. Hale's got eyes everywhere." The man gestured to his companions. "This is Thomas and Ben. We all got our own problems with Hale. Debts he claims we owe, land he says we're squatting on. He's been bleeding this town dry for years. So why come here? Because you're the first person who's told him no and meant it. We figured if you stand up to him at the meeting, maybe it gives the rest of us the courage to do the same." Ward was quiet for a moment, then finally lowered the rifle. "You know what you're asking? Hale doesn't take kindly to being challenged." "We know," Thomas said. He was older, with a weathered face and calloused hands. "But we're tired of being afraid, tired of watching him take whatever he wants while the rest of us scrape by." Ben, the youngest of the three, spoke up. "My family's been here 3 generations. Hale's trying to claim my grandfather borrowed money and never paid it back. But my grandfather died 20 years ago, and there's no proof of any loan. It's all lies." Maylin stepped forward, and all 3 men looked at her with varying degrees of surprise. She was used to that look by now. "How many others?" she asked. The store clerk blinked. "Ma'am? How many other people has Hale done this to?" The 3 men exchanged glances. "Hard to say exactly. Maybe a dozen families. Some already gave up and left. Others are hanging on by their fingernails." "And the sheriff knows?" "Sheriff's in Hale's pocket. Everyone knows it, but no one can prove it." Maylin looked at Ward, an idea forming. "What if we don't need to prove the sheriff's corrupt? What if we just need to make it impossible for him to ignore what's happening?" Ward frowned. "How?" "Gather everyone Hale's wronged. Bring them to the meeting. Make them stand up and tell their stories. One person complaining is easy to dismiss. A dozen? That's harder." The store clerk nodded slowly. "She's right. If we all speak up at once, it makes Hale look like what he is, a thief with a fancy title." "It's risky," Thomas said. "Hale won't take kindly to being embarrassed in public." "He's already planning to take everything," Ward pointed out. "Can't get much riskier than that." They talked for another hour, making plans, identifying who might be willing to speak and who would need convincing. By the time the 3 men left, the first gray light of dawn was touching the eastern sky. Ward locked the door behind them and set the rifle down. "You think this'll work?" Maylin wrapped her shawl tighter around herself. "I think it's the only chance we have." The day of the meeting arrived too quickly. Maylin dressed carefully, choosing the best dress she had, still simple, still worn, but clean and mended. Ward put on a shirt that wasn't stained with work, ran a comb through his hair. They looked at each other in the morning light, and Maylin could see the fear he was trying to hide. "Whatever happens," she said, "we face it together." Ward nodded. Together. The town hall was packed when they arrived, every bench filled, people standing along the walls, the air thick with tension and body heat. Maylin felt every eye on her as she walked in beside Ward, felt the whispers start like wind through grass. But she kept her head up, her spine straight. She'd walked through worse than this. Victor Hale sat at the front, flanked by his men and the sheriff. He looked relaxed, confident, like a man who knew he'd already won. When he saw Ward and Maylin enter, his smile widened. The mayor, a thin man with nervous hands, called the meeting to order. "We're here to address a claim brought by Mr. Hale regarding land ownership and outstanding debts. Mr. Hale, you have the floor." Hale stood, and the room quieted. "Thank you, Mayor. This is a simple matter, really. Back in 1873, I loaned Caleb Ward $200 to help him through a difficult winter. The terms were clear, repayment within 5 years, with the land as collateral. Ward never paid. I've been patient, but patience has limits." Ward started to stand, but Maylin put a hand on his arm. "Wait," she whispered. Hale continued. "Now, I understand Ward's circumstances. Times are hard for everyone. So I'm offering him a generous settlement. Sign over the land and we'll forget the debt. Clean slate. That's awfully kind of you, Victor, someone called from the back, and there was laughter. Hale's smile tightened. I'm a fair man. Ask anyone. I'd like to ask something, Maylene said, standing. The room went silent. All eyes turned to her, and she felt the weight of their judgment, their curiosity, their suspicion. But she'd come too far to back down now. You may speak, the mayor said, though he looked uncomfortable. Maylin looked directly at Hale. You say you loaned Mr. Ward money in 1873. Do you have proof of this loan? Hale's eyes narrowed. The bank records were destroyed in the fire. Convenient, but surely you have something, a receipt, a signed agreement, anything. My word should be sufficient. Should it? Maylin turned to address the room. Because if we accept one man's word without proof, what stops anyone from claiming anything? What stops Mr. Hale from saying each of you owes him money next? Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Hale's face darkened. This is absurd. I don't need to defend my integrity to a what? Maylin cut him off, her voice sharp. Say it. Tell everyone what you think I am. Hale's jaw worked, but he didn't finish the sentence. Thomas stood from where he'd been sitting near the middle. Hale did the same thing to me. Claims my grandfather borrowed $300. No proof, just his word. Ben rose next. Same here. Says my father owed him money for supplies. But my father kept records, and there's nothing about any debt to Hale. One by one, others stood. A woman whose husband had died, leaving her with children and a farm Hale now claimed. A man who'd been forced to sell at half the value of his land to settle a debt he swore he never owed. Another whose livestock had mysteriously disappeared the week before Hale came calling about repayment. The room erupted in voices, people talking over each other, the careful order of the meeting dissolving into chaos. The mayor banged his gavel, but no one paid attention. Hale shot to his feet. This is a circus. These people are lying to protect Ward. Or maybe, the store clerk called out, you've been lying to all of us for years, and we're finally done pretending we don't see it. The sheriff stood, hand on his gun. Everyone calm down, or I'll clear this room. On whose authority? Jameson demanded. Hale's. The sheriff's face reddened, but before he could respond, a new voice cut through the noise. I can answer that. Everyone turned. An older man Mei Lin didn't recognize stood in the doorway, dressed in travel-worn clothes, a leather satchel in his hand. He looked tired, like he'd ridden hard to get here. Who are you? The mayor asked. Name's William Cross. I'm a federal land agent. He moved through the crowd toward the front, pulling papers from his satchel. I've been investigating irregularities in property transfers throughout this territory. Mr. Hale's name has come up more than once. Hale went very still. I don't know what you think you found, but I found a pattern, Cross interrupted. Claims of debt with no documentation, families forced off their land, property transferred to you at suspiciously low prices. And in every case, the supposed debts originated right around the time the bank records were destroyed. Funny, that. The room was dead silent now. Cross set the papers on the table in front of the mayor. This is a federal investigation. Until it's concluded, all property claims by Mr. Hale are frozen. Hale's composure finally cracked. You can't do this. I have rights. So do the people you've been stealing from. Cross turned to the sheriff. And if you're smart, you'll cooperate with this investigation instead of continuing to obstruct it. The sheriff looked between Hale and Cross, calculating. Finally, he took a step back, hands away from his gun. I'll cooperate. Hale looked around the room, seeing his power crumble in real time. His men shifted uncomfortably, no longer sure where their loyalty should lie. And in that moment, Maylin saw exactly what he was, a bully who'd thrived on fear and silence, and who had nothing left when people stopped being afraid. This isn't over, Hale said, but his voice lacked conviction. Yeah, Ward said quietly from beside Maylin. It is. Cross spent the next hour taking statements, documenting claims, building his case. People lined up to tell their stories, and with each one, Hale seemed to shrink a little more. By the time the meeting finally adjourned, He'd been relegated to a chair in the corner, his men having quietly slipped away. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Ward and Maylin stood by their wagon, exhausted but whole. "How did you know?" Ward asked. "About the federal agent?" "I didn't, but I figured if enough noise got made, someone would have to pay attention eventually." "Risky. Everything's risky." She looked at him. "At least this way we controlled how loud the noise was." Ward smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him in days. "You're something else, you know that?" "I'm just tired of men like Hale winning." They rode home in comfortable silence, the valley welcoming them back with familiar sounds and smells. When they reached the cabin, Ward helped her down from the wagon, and for a moment they stood there, neither quite ready to let go of the day. "Thank you," Ward said finally, "for standing up, for being brave when I wasn't sure I could be." Maylin shook her head. "You would have fought regardless." "Yeah, but I might have lost. You gave us a chance." She didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded. They went inside, and the cabin felt different somehow, safer, more solid, like it had been tested and proven strong enough to hold them. That night, for the first time since arriving, Maylin left her door unlocked. The unlocked door changed nothing and everything at the same time. Ward never tried it, never even glanced at it differently. But Maylin felt the shift in herself. A small surrender to the possibility that maybe this place, this man, could be trusted. Maybe not completely. Trust was expensive, and she'd spent all she had years ago. But enough. Enough to sleep without keeping one ear tuned for footsteps. Enough to let her guard down by inches. 3 days after the meeting, William Cross came by the cabin. He rode up alone in the late morning, dismounting with the stiffness of someone who'd been in the saddle too long. Ward was mending fence posts near the creek, and Maylin was inside kneading bread dough when she heard the horse. She wiped flour from her hands and stepped outside. Cross tipped his hat to her, polite but tired. "Ma'am? Ward around?" "By the creek." She gestured with her chin. "I'll get him. Appreciate it." She found Ward hammering a post into place, sweat darkening his shirt despite the cool air. "The federal man's here." Ward straightened, wiping his brow with his sleeve. "Trouble?" "Don't know yet." They walked back together and Cross was waiting on the porch, hat in hands. Up close, Maylin could see the lines around his eyes, the gray threading through his beard. This was a man who'd seen too much and still kept looking. "Mr. Ward." "Miss." Cross nodded to each of them. "Won't take much of your time, just wanted to update you on the investigation." "Come inside, Ward said. "We've got coffee." They settled around the table, and Maylin poured 3 cups while Cross pulled a small notebook from his coat pocket. He flipped through pages covered in tight handwriting, then looked up. Found enough evidence to charge Hale with fraud, extortion, and conspiracy. Sheriff's being investigated for corruption. Probably won't keep his badge. Several other men in Hale's employ are facing charges too. Ward leaned back in his chair. "So it's done." "The legal part, mostly. Still need to sort through all the property claims, figure out what's legitimate and what's fabricated. That'll take months, maybe longer. But Hale won't be bothering you anymore. He's in federal custody, awaiting trial." Relief should have washed over Maylin, but it didn't. Something in Cross's tone suggested there was more. "What else?" she asked. Cross met her eyes, and she saw respect there. This man didn't miss much. "Hale's got friends. People who benefited from his schemes, who might not be happy about him going down. I can't prove they'll come after you, but I'd keep my guard up if I were you." Ward's jaw tightened. "How many friends?" "Hard to say. 3 or 4 I know of for certain. Men who helped him pressure folks, enforce his claims. They're not under arrest, not enough evidence, but they're not happy." "Names?" Cross hesitated, then scribbled on a page and tore it out. "These 4. The last one, Pike. He's the worst. Mean drunk with a temper. He was Hale's enforcer, did the dirty work Hale didn't want his hands on." Ward took the paper, studied the names. Maylin recognized one from the auction, a man who'd stood near the back, arms crossed, watching her like she was livestock. "What can we do?" she asked. "Be careful. Don't travel alone. Keep that rifle loaded." Cross drained his coffee and stood. I'll keep you informed as things develop. And if any of these men come around, you send word to me immediately. I'm staying in town another few weeks." After Cross left, Ward pinned the list to the wall and stared at it like the names might rearrange themselves into something less threatening. "You know them?" Mei Lin asked. "Pike, yeah. Seen him around. The others I've heard of." He turned to her. "This doesn't change anything. We keep doing what we've been doing. We just do it smarter." "Smarter how?" Ward thought for a moment. "I'll teach you to shoot." Mei Lin blinked. "What?" "The rifle. I'll teach you. If something happens and I'm not here, you should know how to defend yourself." She'd never held a gun in her life. The idea of it felt foreign, dangerous. But then again, so had getting on that platform, and she'd survived that. "All right." They started that afternoon. Ward set up targets, old cans balanced on fence posts, and showed her how to hold the rifle, how to sight down the barrel, how to breathe and squeeze instead of pull. The first shot kicked so hard it nearly knocked her over, and the noise split her ears like thunder. "Again," Ward said, patient. She missed the next 5 shots, hit the post on the 6th, sent a can spinning on the 7th. By the time the sun started dropping, her shoulder ached and her ears rang, but she'd hit more than she'd missed. "Not bad," Ward said, taking the rifle. "You're a natural." "I'm sore." "That too." They walked back to the cabin in the fading light, and Mei Lin felt something settle in her chest. Not confidence exactly, but capability. The knowledge that she could fight back if she had to. It was a small thing, but small things added up. The peace lasted 4 days. Mei Lin was hanging laundry when she saw the riders. 3 of them, coming from the east, moving at an easy pace like they had all the time in the world. Ward was in town picking up supplies. Wouldn't be back for another hour at least. She was alone. She walked calmly to the cabin, retrieved the rifle from where Ward kept it loaded by the door, and positioned herself on the porch. Her hands shook, but she kept them steady on the stock, remembering Ward's instructions. "Breathe, aim, don't show fear." The rider stopped about 30 feet out. She recognized the one in the middle from the list, Pike. He was a big man, thick through the shoulders, with a face that looked like it had been on the losing end of too many fights. The other 2 were younger, meaner, with the eyes of men who enjoyed hurting things. "Well now," Pike said, grinning. "Where's Ward?" "Not here." Mei Lin kept her voice level. "We can see that." Asked where he is. "Town." Pike dismounted and the other 2 followed. "That's unfortunate. We rode all this way to have a word with him. Guess we'll have to settle for you instead." "You should leave." "Should we?" Pike took a step closer. "See, we got some concerns about what happened to Mr. Hale." "Good man, Mr. Hale. Treated us fair, and then your man goes and ruins everything with his lies. Hale was stealing land. That's one story. Ours is different, and we figure someone ought to pay for what happened." Another step. Maybe Ward, maybe his little China doll. Either works for us. Mei Lin raised the rifle, sighting down the barrel the way Ward taught her. "Don't come closer." Pike laughed. "You even know how to use that thing?" She fired. The bullet hit the ground 2 feet in front of Pike's boots, kicking up dirt. All 3 men froze, and Pike's smile vanished. "Next one goes through your chest," Mei Lin said, chambering another round. Her shoulders screamed from the recoil, but she didn't let it show. "Leave, now!" Pike's hand moved toward his gun, and Mei Lin adjusted her aim to his center mass. "Try it, see what happens." For a long moment, nobody moved. The wind pushed through the valley, rattling the laundry on the line, and somewhere a crow called. Pike's eyes were cold, calculating, measuring whether she'd really pull the trigger. Then hoofbeats sounded from the west, and Ward came tearing around the bend, his own rifle in hand. He took in the scene in a glance and brought his horse to a hard stop between Mei Lin and the 3 men. "You picked the wrong day, Pike," Ward said, and there was nothing careful in his voice now. Just rage, barely leashed. Pike raised his hands in mock surrender. "Easy, Ward, just came to talk." "Talk's done. You got 3 seconds to ride out before I start shooting. You can't kill all 3 of us. Watch me try." The 2 younger men were already backing toward their horses, hands away from their weapons. They didn't have Pike's meanness or stupidity, and they knew a losing fight when they saw one. Pike held his ground another moment, then spat in the dirt. "This ain't over." "Yeah, it is. You just don't know it yet." Pike mounted his horse, jerking the reins hard enough to make the animal dance. "You made a big mistake, Ward. Protecting her. She ain't worth it." Ward raised his rifle. "One." Pike wheeled his horse around, and the three of them rode off, kicking up dust. Ward didn't lower his weapon until they disappeared over the ridge, and even then he stayed mounted, watching. Finally, he dismounted and turned to Maylin. "You all right?" She nodded, though her hands were shaking so badly now she could barely hold the rifle. Ward took it gently from her, checking the chamber, and his eyes widened when he saw she'd fired. "You shot at them?" "Warned them. Hit the ground." Something like pride crossed his face. "Good. That was smart." He set the rifle against the porch rail and put his hands on her shoulders, ducking his head to meet her eyes. "You're shaking." "I know." "That's all right. Means you're human." He guided her to the porch steps and they sat, both of them watching the empty ridge. "I'm sorry I wasn't here." "You're here now." "Not good enough. They could have—" He cut himself off, jaw working. "I should have stayed." "You couldn't have known." "Doesn't matter. I should have known. After Cross warned us, I should have—" He stood abruptly, pacing. "This is my fault. It's Hale's fault, and Pike's, not yours." But Ward wasn't listening. He was already in his head, running through scenarios, consequences, all the ways this could go wrong. Maylin recognized the spiral. She'd done it herself enough times. "Ward." She stood, crossing to him. "Look at me." He stopped pacing but didn't meet her eyes. "Look at me," she repeated, firmer this time. He did, and she saw the fear there, raw and undisguised. Fear for her. Fear of failing to protect her. Fear of what men like Pike could do if they came back when he wasn't here. "I'm not helpless," she said. "You taught me to shoot. I used it, and I'll use it again if I have to." "That's not the point." "Then what is?" Ward ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "The point is you shouldn't have to. You shouldn't have to stand on a porch with a rifle, scared for your life because some bastard thinks he can take whatever he wants. That's not right." "Nothing about this is right, but it's what we have." She stepped closer. "We can't control what they do, only what we do. And right now, we're still here, still standing. That's something." Ward looked at her for a long moment, and something in his expression shifted. "When did you get so steady?" "I've always been steady, you just didn't notice." That pulled a rough laugh from him. "Fair enough." They went inside, and Ward immediately started checking the cabin. Windows, doors, making sure everything was secure. Maylin watched him move through the space, this man who'd bought her for $1 and somehow become the most decent person she'd ever known. It should have been impossible, but here they were. "They'll come back," she said. Ward didn't deny it. "Probably." "What do we do?" He stopped at the window, looking out at the valley. "We prepare, and we make sure we're not alone when they do." That night, Ward rode to Jameson's place and came back with promises. Jameson would spread the word. If Pike or any of Hale's men made another move, people would know. They'd have witnesses, backup, a community that was finally starting to remember how to stand together. It wasn't perfect, but it was more than nothing. The next few days passed in tense quiet. Ward didn't leave the cabin unless necessary, and when he did, he made sure Maylin was armed and the doors were barred. She kept the rifle close, practiced her aim until her shoulder was one massive bruise. They took turns sleeping, keeping watch, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It dropped on the 6th night. Maylin was dozing in her chair when Ward shook her awake. "They're here." She was on her feet instantly, reaching for the rifle. Through the window she could see torches, 4, maybe 5 of them, moving up the valley road, not trying to hide, announcing themselves. "How many?" she asked. "More than last time." Ward's face was grim. "I count at least 6. "We can't fight 6. "No, but we can hold them off until help arrives." He'd already sent word to Jameson when he spotted the torches. Question was whether help would get here in time. The riders stopped at the edge of the property, and Pike's voice carried across the distance. "Ward, get out here!" Ward positioned himself at the window, rifle ready. "State your business." "You know our business. You ruined a good thing, and now you're going to pay for it." "Federal agents got different ideas about that." "Agent ain't here, and we're done waiting." Pike raised his voice. "You got 1 minute to come out, or we burn you out." Maylin felt ice flood her veins. They're bluffing. Maybe, maybe not. Ward glanced at her. "If they rush us, you shoot anyone who gets through the door. Don't hesitate. Don't think. Just shoot." She nodded, mouth dry. 30 seconds, Ward." Ward fired a shot over their heads, and the crack of the rifle split the night. "First man who steps on my property gets worse than that." The response was immediate. Gunfire erupted from the riders, bullets slamming into the cabin walls, shattering a window. Ward dropped below the sill, pulling Maylin down with him. Glass rained down around them, and the smell of gunpowder filled the air. "They're serious," Maylin said, stating the obvious because her brain couldn't quite process what was happening. "Yeah." Ward crawled to the broken window, raised his rifle, and fired. One of the torches dropped, and someone screamed. "That's one." But there were still 5 more, and they were spreading out, circling the cabin. Maylin heard footsteps on the roof, and her heart kicked into overdrive. "They're going to burn us." Ward heard it too. He fired another shot through the ceiling, and the footsteps scrambled away. But they'd be back. There were too many of them, and only 2 of Ward and Maylin. "We need to move," Ward said. "Out the back. Get to the barn. Take the horse. Ride for help." "What about you?" "I'll hold them here. Give you time to run." "No." "Maylin." "No." She met his eyes, and there was no room for argument in her voice. "We stay together. We fight together. Or we die together. Those are the options." Ward looked like he wanted to protest, but more gunfire erupted, closer now, and he turned back to the window. "Fine. But you stay low, you hear me? Low and behind cover." She positioned herself at the opposite window, rifle raised. Through the broken glass, she could see shadows moving, torchlight dancing. She picked a target, a man crouching behind a wagon, and fired. The recoil nearly knocked her over, and she didn't know if she hit him, but the shadow didn't move again. The battle turned into chaos. Gunfire from both sides, smoke filling the cabin, the acrid taste of burnt powder on Maylin's tongue. She fired until the rifle was empty, then reloaded with shaking hands the way Ward had taught her. Someone tried the door, and Ward shot through it, the wood splintering. A body hit the porch with a heavy thud. And then, through the noise and smoke, Maylin heard something else. Hoofbeats. A lot of them. "Ward!" she shouted. "Someone's coming!" Ward risked a glance through the window, and his face transformed. "It's Jameson, and half the damn town!" The riders outside heard it too. Pike's voice cut through the chaos. "Fall back! Move!" But Jameson's group was already on them, surrounding the cabin, cutting off escape routes. The gunfire sputtered and died as Pike's men found themselves outnumbered and outflanked. Someone yelled for them to throw down their weapons, and after a moment's hesitation, they did. Ward lowered his rifle, breathing hard. Maylin did the same, her whole body trembling with adrenaline and relief, and about a dozen other things she didn't have names for. The cabin door opened, and Jameson stepped through, surveying the damage. "You two all right?" "Been better," Ward said. "But yeah, we're alive." Jameson nodded to Maylin. "Ma'am, you did good. Real good." She didn't trust herself to speak, so she just nodded. Outside, Pike and his men were being tied up, disarmed, held at gunpoint by people who were tired of being afraid. Cross appeared, looking grim but satisfied. "Caught them in the act this time," he said, stepping into the cabin. "That's attempted murder, arson, assault. They're done." Ward slumped against the wall, the adrenaline finally draining. "It's over?" "It's over," Cross confirmed. "For real this time." Maylin set down the rifle and realized her hands were covered in cuts from the broken glass. She hadn't even felt it happen. Ward saw and immediately moved to her, taking her hands gently. "You're hurt." "I'm fine." "You're bleeding." "I said I'm fine." But she let him lead her to the table, let him clean and bandage the cuts with careful hands that shook almost as badly as hers. Outside, they could hear Pike being dragged away, still cursing, still making threats. But his voice grew fainter, less important, until it was just another sound in the night. Clara appeared with medical supplies, checking them both over with efficient kindness. "You'll have bruises for weeks, but nothing's broken." "Lucky." "Yeah," Ward said, looking at Mei Lin. "Real lucky." People stayed for another hour, making sure the cabin was secure, that no one else was coming. Thomas boarded up the broken window. Ben helped clean up the glass. The store clerk found bullet holes in the walls and whistled low. "Going to have stories about this for years," he said. "Lucky us," Mei Lin muttered. Eventually, everyone left except Jameson and Clara. They sat at the table, drinking coffee that had gone cold hours ago, none of them quite ready to let the night end. "Whole town's talking about what you did," Jameson said, "standing up to Pike like that. Not many people would have had the guts." Mei Lin shook her head. "Wasn't guts, just necessity. Call it what you want. People noticed. You're not the outsider anymore. You're one of us." The words settled over her, strange and unfamiliar. One of us. She'd never been one of anyone, not since leaving China. Always separate, always foreign, always just outside the circle. The idea that these people might actually accept her felt impossible. But Clara reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "He's right, you know. What you did today, what you've done since you got here, that matters. People see it." Mei Lin didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded. After Jameson and Clara left, Ward and Mei Lin sat in the damaged cabin, too wired to sleep. The smell of gunpowder still hung in the air, mixed with blood and fear and something else. Relief, maybe. Or hope. "You could have run," Ward said finally. "When they first showed up, you could have taken the horse and been gone before things got bad. So could you. This is my home. It's mine too now." The words surprised her as much as they seemed to surprise him. But they were true. Somewhere between the auction platform and this bullet-riddled cabin, this place had become hers. Not because someone gave it to her, or because she'd earned it through suffering, but because she'd chosen it, chosen to stay, to fight, to build something that mattered. Ward was quiet for a long time. Then he reached across the space between them and took her hand, careful of the bandages, gentle despite his calloused palms. "Thank you," he said, "for not running, for staying, for being braver than I deserved." Mei Lin squeezed his hand back. "Thank you for giving me a reason to be brave." They sat like that until the first gray light of dawn touched the windows, holding on to each other in a cabin that had almost burned, in a valley that had almost been lost. Outside, the world was changing. Inside, something had already changed. They'd survived the worst of it, and somehow, impossibly, they'd survived together. The morning after the siege brought a strange kind of quiet. Not peaceful exactly, but settled, like the valley itself had been holding its breath and finally exhaled. Ward was up before sunrise, patching the bullet holes in the walls with whatever scrap wood he could find, and Mei Lin swept up glass until her back ached and her hands cramped around the broom handle. They worked in silence, both too tired for conversation, both still processing what had happened. Every so often, Mei Lin would catch Ward staring at a bullet hole or a splintered doorframe, his jaw tight, and she knew he was replaying the night in his head. She did the same thing with the broken window, remembering the sound of gunfire, the weight of the rifle in her hands, the moment she'd pulled the trigger and watched a shadow fall. Around mid-morning, Thomas showed up with proper glass and framing materials. "Figured you could use these," he said, unloading supplies from his wagon. "On the house." Ward started to protest, but Thomas held up a hand. "You stood up when the rest of us were too scared. Least I can do is make sure you've got windows that close." They worked together replacing the shattered pane, and by noon the cabin looked almost normal again. Almost. The bullet holes were still visible if you knew where to look, pockmarks in the wood that would stay there as reminders. Some scars didn't heal, they just became part of the structure. Over the next few days, more people came by. Ben brought fresh venison. The store clerk delivered flour and coffee, refusing payment. Claire returned with vegetables from her garden and stayed to help Mei Lin replant the sections that had been trampled during the fight. Even the mayor stopped by, hat in hand, to apologize for not believing them sooner about Hale. "Should have listened," he said, looking genuinely ashamed. "Should have seen what was happening before it got this bad." Ward accepted the apology without much warmth. "What matters is what happens next." "Fair enough." The mayor shifted his weight. "There's going to be a trial, federal court. They'll want both of you to testify." Mei Lin felt her stomach tighten. Standing up in a courtroom, telling her story to strangers who might not believe her, might not even see her as fully human, it sounded like torture. But she nodded anyway. "When?" "Month, maybe 2. Cross will let you know." The mayor tipped his hat. "For what it's worth, the whole town's behind you now. What you did, standing your ground like that, it reminded people what courage looks like." After he left, Ward found Mei Lin in the garden, staring at a row of carrots that needed thinning. "You all right?" "Tired of being brave," she said. "Tired of fighting." "Yeah, me too." They stood there together, and Mei Lin realized that exhaustion was its own kind of intimacy. Being able to admit you were tired, that you couldn't keep the mask up anymore, that required trust. And somehow, without either of them planning it, they'd built that. "What do we do now?" she asked. Ward looked around the valley, at the cabin with its patched walls and new window, at the garden struggling back to life, at the mountains of the distance, turning purple in the afternoon light. "We live. Just live. Figure out what that means when nobody's trying to kill us." It sounded simple. It wasn't. The first week after Pike's arrest, Mei Lin woke up 3 times convinced she heard footsteps outside. Each time it was nothing. Wind, animals, her own fear playing tricks. But each time Ward was already awake, rifle in hand, checking the perimeter before coming back to tell her it was safe. "You're not sleeping either," she said on the 3rd night, finding him at the window at 2 a.m. "Can't seem to manage it." She sat beside him, and they watched the darkness together. "How long until it stops?" "The fear?" "The waiting for it to happen again." Ward was quiet for a long time. "Don't know. Maybe it doesn't stop. Maybe you just get better at living with it." That wasn't the answer she wanted, but it was honest. She appreciated that more than comfort. 2 weeks after the siege, Cross returned with news. The trial date was set, 6 weeks out. Hale and his men would be tried together, and the prosecution wanted Ward and Mei Lin to testify about the attack on the cabin. "It'll be hard," Cross warned them. "Defense lawyers will try to make you look like liars or troublemakers. They'll dig into your past, ask uncomfortable questions. You need to be ready for that." Mei Lin thought about her past. The parts she'd buried. The parts she never talked about. The ship from China. The boarding house in San Francisco. The men who'd bought and sold women like merchandise. None of it was relevant to what Hale had done, but she knew how these things worked. They'd make it relevant. They'd make her the problem. "What kind of questions?" she asked. Cross looked uncomfortable. "About how you got here. Why Ward bought you. Whether there was any arrangement between you that might make your testimony unreliable." Ward's face darkened. "That's nobody's business." "I agree, but they'll ask anyway. And you need to have answers ready that don't make things worse." They spent the afternoon preparing, Cross playing defense attorney, asking the kinds of questions that made Mei Lin's skin crawl. "Where did you come from? Why were you on that auction block? What exactly is your relationship with Mr. Ward? Are you being compensated for your testimony?" Each question felt like a trap, and each answer felt inadequate. By the time Cross left, Mei Lin had a headache that pounded behind her eyes like a hammer. Ward made her tea, and they sat at the table in silence. "We don't have to do this," Ward said finally. "We could refuse to testify. Let them build their case without us. And if they lose, then they lose." Mei Lin shook her head. "Hale tried to take everything from us. If we don't testify, we're letting him win even from a jail cell. I won't do that." Ward reached across the table and took her hand. "Then we do it together. And whatever they ask, whatever they say, we tell the truth. That's all we can do." The truth. Such a simple concept, so impossibly complicated when other people got to decide what counted as truth and what didn't. 3 weeks before the trial, something shifted between them. Maylin couldn't pinpoint exactly when it happened. Maybe it was the night Ward taught her to play cards and she beat him 3 hands in a row, or the morning she found him mending her torn dress without being asked, or the afternoon they worked side by side in the garden and their hands touched reaching for the same tool. Small moments, accumulating like snow, until suddenly the weight of them changed the landscape. They were careful with each other in a way they hadn't been before. Ward started asking if she needed anything before he went to town. Maylin made sure his coffee was exactly how he liked it. They talked more, about nothing important, weather, crops, the horse that had developed a limp. Safe topics that let them be close without acknowledging how close they'd gotten. But at night, when Maylin lay in her bed with the unlocked door between them, she thought about what it meant that Ward had never once tried to open it. That he'd given her space and safety and asked for nothing in return except her presence. That wasn't how men worked, in her experience. Men took. They demanded. They used whatever leverage they had to get what they wanted. Ward just existed beside her. And somehow that was more terrifying than any of the alternatives, because it meant she might actually be able to trust him. And trust was the most dangerous thing she could offer. One evening, about 2 weeks before the trial, they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset when Ward spoke without looking at her. "I need to tell you something." Maylin's stomach dropped. Here it was, the thing she'd been waiting for, the moment he'd ask for something she couldn't give. "All right," she said carefully. Ward leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. "Before you came here, I wasn't living. I was surviving, but that's not the same thing. Woke up, worked, went to bed, repeat. Didn't see the point in much else." He paused, and Maylin waited. "My wife died 6 years ago. Fever took her in 3 days, and there wasn't anything I could do except watch. After that, I just shut down. Stopped caring about anything except keeping the ranch going. Figured that's all I had left." Maylin felt something tighten in her chest. She'd known there had been someone else. The cabin had traces of a woman's touch in places, things Ward wouldn't have thought to add on his own. But hearing him say it made it real. "What was her name?" she asked quietly. "Sarah. She was good. Better than I deserved." Ward finally looked at Maylin's, and his eyes were raw. "I bought you because no one else would. That's true. But I kept you here because you reminded me what it felt like to have someone to come home to. And I know that's selfish, and I know you didn't ask for any of this, but I needed you to know, before the trial, before anything else happens. You should know what you mean to me." The words hung between them, and Maylin didn't know what to do with them. Part of her wanted to run. This was too much, too fast, too complicated. But another part, the part that had been growing stronger since she'd fired that rifle and stood her ground, wanted to stay and see what happened next. "I'm not her," Maylin said finally. "I can't replace her. I don't want you to. Sarah was Sarah, you're you. Both things can be true." "What do you want from me, Ward?" He considered the question seriously. "Nothing you're not willing to give. I just wanted you to know you're not. You're not just some obligation I took on. You matter to me. And if something happens at that trial, if things go wrong, I wanted you to know that." Maylin looked out at the valley, at the land they'd fought for, at the home they'd built from scraps and stubbornness. "You matter to me too," she said, and the admission felt like jumping off a cliff. "I don't know what that means yet, but you do." Ward nodded slowly. "That's enough. For now, that's enough." They didn't talk about it again, but something had changed. The distance between them felt smaller, more permeable. When they worked together now, their movements synchronized in a way that felt natural. When they sat at the table for meals, the silences were comfortable. And at night, when Maylin closed her door, she didn't lock it anymore. The week before the trial, Jameson organized a gathering at his place, a celebration, he called it, though everyone knew it was really a show of support. Half the town showed up, bringing food and drink and stories about their own run-ins with Hale's corruption. It was strange seeing all these people who'd once looked at Maylin with suspicion or contempt, now treating her like one of their own. Clara pulled her aside at one point, pressing a small bundle wrapped in cloth into her hands. "For the trial. You'll want to look proper. Maylin unwrapped it to find a dress, simple but well made, dark blue with clean lines and careful stitching. Not the kind of thing someone gave to an outsider. This was the kind of gift you gave to a friend. I can't accept this, Maylin said, even as her hands smoothed over the fabric. You can and you will. You stood up for this community when you didn't have to. Least we can do is make sure you look the part when you do it again. Clara squeezed her shoulder. You're one of us now, whether you like it or not. That night, riding back to the cabin with Ward, Maylin felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Belonging. It was fragile, new, easily broken, but it was there. They're good people, Ward said, guiding the horse around a rut in the road. They are. Now. Fair point. He glanced at her. You nervous about the trial? Terrified. Yeah, me too. The honesty of it made her smile despite everything. We'll be terrible at it. Probably. But at least we'll be terrible together. The trial came faster than Maylin wanted and slower than she could stand. They rode to town the day before, staying at the boarding house Cross had arranged for them. Separate rooms, proper and appropriate, though Maylin barely slept knowing Ward was just down the hall instead of across the cabin. The courthouse was bigger than she'd expected. 2 stories of brick and wood with windows that looked down on the main street. People were already gathering when they arrived. Townfolk, ranchers from neighboring valleys, reporters from bigger cities who'd gotten wind of the story. Maylin wore Clara's dress and kept her spine straight, even though every instinct screamed at her to make herself smaller, invisible. Cross met them at the entrance. Ready? No, Ward said. Good. Means you'll be honest. Cross led them inside to a waiting room. You'll testify separately. Ward first, then Maylin. Just answer the questions truthfully and don't let them rattle you. What if they do rattle us? Maylin asked. Then you take a breath, collect yourself, and answer anyway. The jury's not looking for perfection. They're looking for truth. Easier said than done. Ward was called first, and Maylin sat in the waiting room listening to the muffled sounds of the courtroom, voices rising and falling, occasional laughter, the bang of the judge's gavel. She tried to imagine what they were asking him, how he was answering, whether he was managing to stay calm. An hour passed, then 2. When the door finally opened and Ward emerged, he looked exhausted but intact. How was it? She asked. Awful. Your turn. She wanted to ask more, but the bailiff was already calling her name. Maylin stood, smoothed Clara's dress, and walked into the courtroom. The room was packed. Faces turned to look at her, some curious, some hostile, some sympathetic. At the front, Hale sat beside his lawyer, wearing a suit that made him look respectable despite the chains on his wrists. His eyes found hers, and he smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. The prosecutor, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, guided her through the basics first. Name, how she came to be in the territory, how Ward had bought her at the auction. Each answer felt like exposing a wound, but she kept her voice steady. Then Hale's lawyer stood. He was older, silver-haired, with the kind of smooth voice that made lies sound like truth. Miss Maylin, he began, putting emphasis on her name like it was foreign and suspect. You claim Mr. Ward bought you at auction, is that correct? Yes. For how much? $1. $1. He let that sit. And what exactly did he buy you for? The implication was clear, and Maylin felt heat rise in her face, but Cross had prepared her for this. He bought my contract. For work. What kind of work? Housekeeping? Cooking? General labor. I see. And did this arrangement include any, other services? The courtroom murmured. The judge banged his gavel. Counselor, get to your point or move on. The lawyer smiled. My point, Your Honor, is that this woman has a vested interest in protecting Mr. Ward. If she's dependent on him for shelter, food, her very livelihood, wouldn't she say anything to keep that arrangement intact? Maylin felt anger cut through her fear. I would say the truth as you see it. But you're a foreigner, Miss Maylin. You don't understand our laws, our customs. How can we trust your perception of events? I understand when men with guns try to burn down a home. That's not complicated. More murmuring. The lawyer's smile tightened. You claim Mr. Hale's men attacked the cabin. But isn't it possible you and Mr. Ward provoked them? That you're twisting the facts to make yourselves look like victims? We didn't provoke anything. We were defending our home. Your home? Interesting choice of words. You've been in the territory, what, a few months? And already you consider it your home? Yes, because Mr. Ward allows you to stay there. Because I've earned my place there. The lawyer paced, building to something. Let's talk about that night. You say 6 men attacked. You say they fired first. But you also admit you shot at them. Isn't it possible you escalated the situation? That your actions turned a simple confrontation into violence? Mei Lin's hands clenched in her lap. They came with torches and guns. There was nothing simple about it. So you say, but we only have your word and Mr. Ward's, 2 people with every reason to lie. We're not lying. Perhaps not intentionally, but fear can distort memory. And you were afraid that night, weren't you? Of course I was afraid. They were trying to kill us. Or were they simply trying to collect on a legitimate debt, and you overreacted? The prosecutor objected, and the judge sustained it, but the damage was done. The lawyer had planted doubt, made her sound unreliable, made the whole thing seem questionable. Mei Lin felt her composure cracking, felt the old helplessness creeping back in. Then the lawyer made a mistake. Miss Mei Lin, one final question. Why should this jury believe anything you say when you're just a woman who is worth $1? The courtroom went silent. Even the lawyer seemed to realize he'd gone too far. Mei Lin looked at him, then at the jury, then at Hale sitting there with his smug expression, and she found her voice. You're right. I was worth $1. That's what they decided when they put me on that platform. $1 for a life, for a person, for everything I'd survived just to get there. And you know what? I believed them. I thought that's all I was worth. That's what men like you, like Hale, like everyone who's ever looked at me and seen something less than human, that's what you want me to believe. She stood, and no one stopped her. But I was wrong. And you're wrong. I'm worth more than $1. I'm worth more than what any man decides to pay for me. And when those men came to our home with guns and torches, I didn't stand my ground because I was trying to protect some arrangement or keep my place or any of the things you're implying. I stood my ground because it was my home, because I'd built it with my own hands, because I'd earned the right to defend it. Mei Lin turned to the jury. You want to know if you can trust me? I don't care. Trust me or don't. But everything I've said is true. And if you can't see that, then you're choosing not to. Just like people chose not to see what Hale was doing for years. Just like they chose not to see me as a person on that platform. But I'm done letting other people's blindness define me. She sat back down, heart pounding, waiting for someone to reprimand her. But the judge just looked at Hale's lawyer and said, Any more questions, counselor? The lawyer shook his head, looking rattled. No, Your Honor. Then the witness is excused. Mei Lin left the stand on shaking legs and didn't look back. Outside the courtroom, Ward was waiting. He didn't ask how it went. He just pulled her into a hug, and she let herself lean into it for a moment before pulling back. I probably made things worse, she said. I doubt that. Cross emerged a few minutes later, and his expression was unreadable. That was either brilliant or disastrous. We'll find out when the jury comes back. They waited 3 days. 3 days of sitting in the boarding house, watching the street, trying to read meaning into every person who walked by. The town was divided. Some people thought Hale would walk, others were certain he'd hang. Mei Lin tried not to think about either possibility. On the 3rd day, word came that the jury had reached a verdict. The courtroom filled again, the same faces, the same tension. Mei Lin sat beside Ward, their hands clasped between them where no one could see. The jury foreman stood. On the charge of fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of extortion, guilty. On the charge of attempted murder, guilty. On all remaining charges, guilty. The courtroom erupted. Hale's face went white, then red. His lawyer started objecting, but the judge silenced him with a look. Victor Hale, you are sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. Your assets will be liquidated to compensate your victims. This court is adjourned. It was over. Mei Lin felt Ward's hand tighten around hers, felt the relief wash through him like a wave. Around them, people were celebrating, but she just sat there, trying to process what had happened. They'd won. Against every odd, every expectation, they'd actually won. Outside, the town threw an impromptu celebration. Someone brought out a fiddle. Food appeared from nowhere. People congratulated Ward and Mei Lin like they were heroes, and maybe they were. Or maybe they were just two people who'd refused to give up. As the sun set and the party continued, Ward and Mei Lin slipped away, walking back toward where they'd tied the horse. They didn't talk, didn't need to. Everything that mattered had already been said. When they reached the edge of town, Ward stopped. "You know what this means? We get to go home. Yeah. And no one can take it from us. Not legally, not ever." Mei Lin looked at the road stretching out toward the valley, toward the cabin with its patched walls and hard-won peace, toward the life they'd built from nothing. "Then let's go home," she said. And they did. The ride back to the valley felt different than any journey Mei Lin had taken before. Not because the road had changed or the landscape looked new, but because for the first time since stepping off that ship in San Francisco, she was going somewhere that belonged to her. Not in the legal sense. Ward's name was on whatever papers mattered, but in the way that counted. She'd bled for that land, fought for it, nearly died defending it. That made it hers in a way no document could capture. Ward was quiet beside her, guiding the horse with easy hands, and Mei Lin wondered what he was thinking. Whether he felt the same shift she did, or whether coming home had always felt like this for him, and he just didn't know how to explain it. Some things couldn't be explained anyway. They just had to be lived. The sun was setting by the time they crested the final ridge and saw the cabin below, nestled in the valley with smoke curling from the chimney. Mei Lin frowned. "Did you leave the stove burning?" Ward's hand moved to the rifle. "No." They approached cautiously, but as they got closer, Mei Lin recognized the horse tied to the post, Jameson's. And there, sitting on the porch with a mug in his hands, was Jameson himself. "Figured you two would be back around now," he called out. "Hope you don't mind. Clara sent me ahead to get the fire going. Didn't seem right. You coming home to a cold house after everything." Ward dismounted, and some of the tension left his shoulders. "Appreciate that." Clara appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. "Got stew on the stove and fresh bread cooling. You must be starving." "Boss, it is. They were. They'd barely eaten during the trial, too nervous to stomach much, and now that it was over, Mei Lin felt the emptiness in her gut like a physical ache. They ate at the table, the four of them crowded around it, and Clara told them about what had happened in town while they were gone. How the verdict had spread through the community like wildfire. How people who'd lost land to hail were already filing claims to get it back. How the new sheriff, appointed by the federal agent after the old one resigned in disgrace, was actually doing his job for once. "Whole territory's changing," Jameson said through a mouthful of bread. "And you two started it, whether you meant to or not." Mei Lin wasn't sure how she felt about that. She'd never wanted to start anything, just wanted to survive. But survival had required fighting, and fighting had required standing up, and standing up had somehow turned into something bigger than herself. It was uncomfortable being seen as a symbol. She was just a woman trying to build a life. After Jameson and Clara left, the cabin fell into a comfortable quiet. Mei Lin washed the dishes while Ward fed the stove, and they moved around each other with the ease of people who'd learned each other's rhythms. When everything was clean and put away, they sat on the porch in the cooling air, watching stars emerge one by one. "Feels strange," Ward said finally, "having it be over. Does it feel over to you?" He considered that. "No, but it should, shouldn't it? Hale's in prison. Pike and his men, too. The land's secure. We won. Winning doesn't erase what happened. We still lived through it." Ward nodded slowly. "Yeah, that's what I mean. I keep waiting to feel, I don't know, relief? Peace? Something. But mostly I just feel tired." Mei Lin understood that. The body kept score even when the mind wanted to move on. Maybe peace comes later, after the tired fades. Maybe. Or maybe this is just what life is. Tired and grateful at the same time. They sat with that for a while, and Mei Lin thought about how much had changed in the months since the auction. She'd changed. The frightened woman on that platform wouldn't recognize who she'd become. And Ward had changed too, though more subtly. He smiled more now, talked more, let himself hope for things beyond tomorrow's survival. "What do you want?" Maylin asked suddenly. "Now that it's over, what do you actually want?" Ward looked at her, and in the dim light from the cabin, his face was hard to read. "You mean besides keeping what we have?" "Yes, besides that." He thought for a long moment. "I want to build something, not just maintain it, but grow it. Expand the garden, maybe get some chickens, fix up the barn properly, make this place into something that lasts beyond us." He paused. "And I want you to stay, if you want to. No obligation, just if you want to." The words hung between them, fragile and honest. Maylin's first instinct was to deflect, to make a joke or change the subject. But she'd spent too much of her life hiding what she wanted, and she was tired of it. "I want to stay," she said. "I want to make this work, whatever this is." "What do you think it is?" "I don't know yet. Partnership, maybe, or something more. I haven't figured it out." Ward smiled and it reached his eyes. "That's all right. We've got time to figure it out." Time. Such a luxury. For so long, Maylin had lived moment to moment, never sure if she'd see the next day. The idea that she could plan for next week, next month, next year, it was almost overwhelming. The next morning brought work, as mornings always did. The garden needed attention after their absence. Fences needed mending. The horse needed new shoes. Ward rode into town for supplies while Maylin tackled the weeds that had sprung up with aggressive enthusiasm. By midday, her back ached and her hands were filthy, but the garden looked better. Controlled. Intentional. She was hauling water from the creek when she saw the woman approaching on foot. Young, maybe 19 or 20, with dark hair and a dress that had seen better days. She carried a small bundle and walked with the cautious hope of someone who wasn't sure they'd be welcome. Maylin set down the bucket and waited. The woman stopped about 10 feet away. "Are you Maylin?" "I am." "I heard about you, about what you did, at the trial." The woman shifted her weight. "I'm Sarah Whitmore." I was at the auction. Same one as you, different day, but same place, same man running it." Maylin felt her chest tighten. She remembered that day too clearly. The heat, the laughter, the casual cruelty of being evaluated and found wanting. "What happened to you?" "Man bought me for $3, said he needed help with his ranch." Sarah's laugh was bitter. Turned out he needed other things too. "I ran 2 weeks ago. Been hiding in town, doing wash work for Clara. She told me about you, told me you might understand." "I do." "She also said you might need help here, that maybe there was work." Sarah's voice cracked slightly. "I'm good with animals. I can sew. I don't eat much. And I'll work hard, I promise. I just need somewhere safe." Maylin looked at this young woman, scared, hopeful, trying so hard to be useful because she'd learned that usefulness was the only currency she had. She saw herself in that face, months ago, standing on a platform wondering if anyone would care enough to claim her. "Wait here," Maylin said. She went into the cabin and pulled out the bread Clara had left, some cheese, dried meat. She wrapped it in cloth and brought it back outside. "Eat this first. Then we'll talk about work." Sarah took the bundle with shaking hands. "Thank you. I'll pay you back, I swear." "No need. Just eat." They sat on the porch steps, and Sarah ate like someone who hadn't had a real meal in days. Probably hadn't. When she finished, Maylin asked her about what she could do, what she wanted, what would make her feel safe. By the time Ward returned from town, Maylin had offered Sarah a place in the barn, temporarily, until they could build a proper room, in exchange for help with the animals and garden. Ward took it in stride. "We've got the space, and the work. If she's willing, I've got no objection." That night, with Sarah settled in the barn with blankets and a lantern, Ward and Maylin sat at the table going over what this meant. They'd need more supplies, more food. The barn would need fixing up before winter. It was more responsibility, more mouths to feed, more variables to manage. "You sure about this?" Ward asked. "No, but I couldn't turn her away. She's what I was. What I could still be if things had gone different. You're not responsible for everyone who needs help. I know, but I'm responsible for the help I can give. Maylin met his eyes. Someone gave me a chance when they didn't have to. Maybe it's time I did the same. Ward nodded. Then we'll make it work. And they did, though it wasn't easy. Sarah was skittish at first, flinching at loud noises, watching them like she expected cruelty to emerge at any moment. But Maylin remembered that feeling, and she gave Sarah space to adjust, showed her the work without hovering, offered help without making it feel like charity. Slowly, over days and then weeks, Sarah began to relax, began to smile occasionally, began to take up space like she had a right to it. The work multiplied with 3 people, but so did the productivity. They planted a second garden plot, fixed the barn properly, and added a small room for Sarah. Got chickens, just like Ward had mentioned, and built a coop that Sarah decorated with painted flowers. The valley came alive in a way it hadn't before, with voices and laughter and the sound of people building something together. Word spread, as it always did in small communities. Other women showed up, some looking for work, some just looking for a place to exist without fear. Maylin couldn't take them all in, but she could point them toward Clara, toward the store clerk's wife who needed help, toward Jameson, who always had work during harvest season. The cabin became a waypoint, a place where women who'd been discarded could find their footing again. It wasn't intentional, this network they were building. It just happened, need-meeting capability, and Maylin found herself at the center of something she'd never planned. But she didn't step away from it either. She'd learned something during those months of fighting for her place. That power came not from what you accumulated, but from what you shared. From lifting others up instead of climbing over them. Autumn arrived with cooler nights and leaves turning gold and red. The harvest was good, better than Ward had managed in years, and they spent long days preserving food for winter. Sarah proved invaluable with the canning, her hands quick and sure, and the shelves filled with jars of vegetables and fruits and jams. One evening, after a particularly long day of work, the 3 of them sat around the table for supper. Sarah had made the meal, her first time cooking for them, and she watched nervously as they ate. "It's good," Ward said. "Real good." Sarah's face lit up. "Really? Really? Where'd you learn to cook like this?" "My mother, before." She trailed off, and they didn't push. Everyone had a before, and most of them were painful. After supper, Maylin walked outside to check on the chickens. The valley was beautiful in the twilight, all purple shadows and amber light, and she stood there breathing it in. This place that had tried to break her. This place she'd broken right back until it bent to hold her. Ward found her by the coop. "You all right?" "Just thinking." "About?" "About how none of this was supposed to happen. I was supposed to disappear, be forgotten, end up in some work camp or worse." She looked at him. "Instead, I'm here. I have a home, people I care about, a future that looks like more than just survival." "You earned all of that, did I? Or did I just get lucky? Right place, right time, right person bought me before the wrong one could." Ward was quiet for a moment. "I've thought about that too, about what would have happened if I'd stayed home that day. If someone else had stepped forward, and yeah, luck played a part. But luck only gets you so far. What you did with that luck, how you fought for it, held on to it, that wasn't luck. That was you." Maylin wanted to argue, but she couldn't, because he was right. Luck had brought her here, but she'd built what came after. Every choice to stay, to fight, to stand her ground, those were hers. And she'd made them when it would have been easier to run. "I'm glad it was you," she said quietly. "That day. I'm glad you stepped forward." Ward moved closer, and in the fading light, his scarred face looked almost gentle. "Me too." They stood there in the quiet, close enough to touch but not quite touching, and Maylin felt the last wall between them start to crumble. She'd spent so long protecting herself, building barriers, keeping people at arm's length because closeness meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant danger. But Ward had never asked her to be vulnerable. He'd just been steady, present, patient, waiting for her to come to him in her own time. Maybe her time was now. "Ward," she started, but he shook his head. "You don't have to say anything, not until you're ready." "I think I am ready. I just don't know what to say." "Then don't say it," Just show me." So she did. She closed the distance between them and kissed him, tentative at first, then surer when he kissed her back. It wasn't fireworks or magic or any of the things stories promised. It was just two people who'd survived hell choosing to reach for something gentle, something good. When they pulled apart, Ward was smiling. "Took you long enough. I needed to be sure." "Are you? Sure?" Maylene thought about it, really thought about it. Was she sure? Could she be sure of anything in a world that had taken so much from her? But then she looked at the cabin behind them, at the valley spread out in the twilight, at the life they'd built from nothing, at Ward, with his scars and his steadiness and his complete inability to be anything other than exactly who he was. "Yeah," she said, "I'm sure." Winter came hard that year, with snow that piled up past the windows and temperatures that made the stove work overtime. But they were prepared. The shelves were full, the wood was stacked, and the cabin was warm. Sarah stayed in her room in the barn, insulated with extra walls Ward had built, and she came to the main cabin for meals and warmth during the worst of the cold. On the longest night of winter, they sat around the table playing cards while the wind howled outside. Sarah was winning, which delighted her more than it probably should have, and she crowed over each hand like she'd discovered gold. "You're too good at this," Ward complained. "You've been counting cards?" "Maybe. Or maybe you're just bad at lying." Maylin laughed, watching them bicker with the ease of siblings. This was family, she realized. Not by blood, not by law, but by choice. They'd chosen each other, chosen this life, chosen to build something that mattered out of materials no one else wanted. Later, after Sarah had gone to bed and the fire had burned down to embers, May, Lynn, and Ward sat together on the old couch he'd brought in from the barn. It wasn't comfortable, springs poking through in places, but it was big enough for both of them. "What are you thinking?" Ward asked. "That I never imagined this. Any of this." "What did you imagine?" "Nothing good. I stopped letting myself imagine a long time ago. Seemed safer." Ward pulled her closer, and she let herself lean into him. "And now?" "Now I can't stop imagining. What we'll plant in spring, how to expand the chicken coop, whether we should get a cow. Stupid, normal things that people plan when they believe they have a future. Those aren't stupid things, those are good things." They sat in comfortable silence, watching shadows dance on the wall. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering the world in white, burying the old underlayers of new. Come spring, it would melt and feed the land, help things grow. That's how it worked. The hard times made the good times possible. "I love you," Maylin said, surprising herself. She'd never said those words to anyone, not like this, not meaning them the way she meant them now. Ward tightened his arm around her. "I love you too. Have for a while now. Just wasn't sure you wanted to hear it." "I wanted to hear it. I was just scared." "Of what?" "Of losing it. Of having something good and watching it get taken away." "Nothing's guaranteed," Ward said. "But I can promise you this. I'm not going anywhere, and whatever comes, we'll face it together. All of us." Maylin believed him. That was the remarkable part. After everything, after all the broken promises and lies and cruelty, she believed this one man when he said he'd stay. Maybe that made her a fool, or maybe it made her brave. She wasn't sure which, and she didn't care. Spring arrived with mud and thaw and green shoots pushing through the earth. They planted early, taking advantage of the wet soil, and Sarah proved to have a gift for coaxing things to grow. The garden flourished under her hands, producing more than they could use, and they started selling the surplus in town. Other changes came too. Clara asked May Lynn to help with the women's group she was forming, a place for women to gather, share skills, support each other. May Lynn agreed, though she felt awkward at first, uncertain of her place, but the other women welcomed her, asked her advice, treated her like she belonged. It was still strange being seen as someone worth listening to, but she was learning to accept it. Ward expanded the barn and took on apprentices, young men from town who wanted to learn ranching but didn't have family land. He taught them the same way he'd taught May Lynn everything, with patience and honesty and the expectation that they'd work hard. Some stayed, some left, but all of them left better than they'd arrived. The valley became known as a place where people helped each other, where outsiders were welcome, where your past mattered less than your willingness to work. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was. There were still arguments, still failures, still days when everything went wrong, but they'd built something resilient enough to bend without breaking. 1 year became 2. Sarah fell in love with one of Ward's apprentices, a quiet young man who looked at her like she hung the moon, and they married in a simple ceremony in the valley. Maylin and Ward stood as witnesses, and Clara made a cake that was slightly lopsided but delicious. That night, watching Sarah dance with her new husband, Maylin felt Ward slip his hand into hers. "Think we should make it official?" he asked. She knew what he meant. They'd been living as partners for 2 years now, sharing everything except a legal document. Most people already assumed they were married. Making it official would just be paperwork. "Do you want to?" she asked. "Only if you do. I'm happy either way. Got what I need already." Maylin thought about it. She'd never cared much about marriage. It seemed like another way for men to claim ownership. But this wouldn't be that. This would be a choice she made freely, with full knowledge of who she was and what she wanted. "Yeah," she said, "let's make it official." They married a month later, just the two of them and a judge in town. No ceremony, no celebration, just vows spoken in a dusty office that made it legal. It felt right, keeping it simple. Their life together had been built on simple things: work, trust, small kindnesses, accumulating into something strong. No reason their marriage should be different. Walking out of that office, Maylin felt something shift. She was no longer a woman who'd been bought at auction. She was a landowner, a wife, a person with legal standing and rights. The paper they'd signed wouldn't protect her from everything. The world was still hard, still unjust in countless ways. But it was something, and something was always better than nothing. 3 years after the trial, Cross came by for a final visit. He was moving to a different territory, his work here done, and he wanted to check on them before he left. "Place looks good," he said, surveying the expanded garden, the new barn section, the flock of chickens pecking at the ground. "Really good." "We've been working at it," Ward said. "I can see that." Cross turned to Maylin. "You ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't stood up at that meeting? If you'd stayed quiet?" "Sometimes, usually when I can't sleep." "Want to know what I think would have happened?" "Not particularly, but you'll tell me anyway." Cross smiled. "I think Hale would have won. He would have taken this land and a dozen others. The corruption would have continued. People would have kept suffering in silence. But you spoke up, and that changed everything." Maylin shook her head. "I didn't change everything. I just refused to be silent about one thing. That's how change starts. One person refusing to accept what everyone else has accepted. One voice saying, 'No, this isn't right.' You gave other people permission to speak up too." "I'm not a hero, Cross. I was just scared and angry and tired of losing." "That's what heroes are," he said gently. "Just regular people who get pushed far enough that they push back. Nothing magical about it." After Cross left, Maylin thought about what he'd said. She still didn't feel like a hero. Heroes were supposed to be fearless, selfless, larger than life. She was just a woman trying to build a life worth living. But maybe that was enough. Maybe being ordinary and persistent was its own kind of strength. 5 years after arriving in the valley, Maylin stood in the garden during harvest time, surrounded by abundance. Tomatoes heavy on their vines, squash sprawling across the ground, beans climbing the poles Ward had built. Sarah worked nearby with her daughter, a toddler who'd been born in the cabin during a spring storm, with Maylin delivering her because the midwife couldn't make it through the mud. Ward appeared with water, and they sat in the shade of the barn, watching Sarah chase her daughter through the rows. "Think we did all right?" Ward asked. "Better than all right. We did good." "Yeah, we did." They sat in comfortable silence, and Maylin thought about how far she'd come from that platform. How impossible this life would have seemed to that frightened woman in the torn red dress. She'd survived things that should have broken her, and instead of breaking, she'd learned to build. That was the thing about survival. It wasn't passive. It was active, daily. A choice you made over and over. To get up, to keep going, to believe that tomorrow might be better than today. And sometimes, if you were lucky and stubborn and surrounded by good people, tomorrow actually was better. The sun set over the valley, painting everything gold and amber, and Maylin felt Ward's hand find hers. She squeezed back, holding tight to this life they'd made, this future they'd earned. She'd been worth more than $1. She'd always been worth more. But now she knew it, bone deep and certain, and that made all the difference. People asked her sometimes, the women who came through looking for help, what the secret was, how she'd gone from auction block to landowner, how she'd survived when so many others hadn't. She never had a good answer, because there was no secret, no magic formula, just stubbornness and luck and the willingness to fight for every inch of ground, just finding one person who saw you as human and building from there, just refusing to accept that your worth was determined by what others were willing to pay for you. You make your own worth, she'd tell them, not by what you do or what you have, but by deciding you matter. And then you defend that decision with everything you've got. Some of them understood, some didn't, but she kept saying it anyway because someone had needed to say it to her, and no one had. So she'd figured it out the hard way, through pain and fear and nearly losing everything. If she could save someone else from that learning curve, it was worth repeating until her voice gave out. The seasons turned as they always did. Summer gave way to autumn, autumn to winter, winter to spring. The cycle continued, relentless and beautiful. And through it all, the cabin stood firm, walls reinforced, garden flourishing, a testament to what could be built when people chose cooperation over cruelty. Maylin grew older, her hands more calloused, her face marked by sun and wind and laughter. Ward's hair went more gray, his movements slower but still steady. Sarah's children grew and had children of their own, filling the valley with life and noise and hope. And through it all, Maylin remembered. She never forgot that platform, that auction, that moment of absolute helplessness. She carried it with her like a scar, a reminder of where she'd started. But she didn't let it define where she ended up, because that was the final truth she'd learned, the one that mattered most. Your beginning didn't determine your ending. You could start at the bottom, written off and discarded, and still build something beautiful, still matter, still make a difference in the small corner of the world you inhabited. $1 had bought her body, but nothing could buy her spirit. She'd kept that, protected it, nurtured it until it grew strong enough to carry her through fire. And when the fire was over, she'd used it to light the way for others. That was worth more than all the money in the world. As evening fell over the valley one last time in this story, Maylin stood on the porch she'd helped build, looking out at the land she'd helped tame, surrounded by the family she'd helped create. Ward stood beside her, solid and steady, as he'd always been. And somewhere in the distance, voices carried on the wind, laughter, conversation, the sounds of people living. She'd fought for this, bled for it, nearly died for it, and she'd do it all again, every hard choice, every desperate moment, every battle. Because this life, this ordinary, extraordinary life, was worth fighting for. The valley had tried to break her. Instead, she'd made it home. And that, Maylin thought as she watched the stars emerge one by one, was as close to victory as anyone could ask for.